Hi, we are in chapter 4 today of The Best Bad Thing by Yoshiko Uchida. And the main character, Rinko, is back at Mrs. Hada's house now. And Mrs. Hada's two sons, Zenny and Abu, are there too. They're done bringing the cucumbers to the warehouse and they're back in their truck, back to the house. Chapter 4. As soon as we got home from the factory, Auntie Hata took me upstairs to show me my room. I thought the house was really strange. Everything, including the stairs to the second floor, seemed to be sagging. It was as though a bunch of tired carpenters had put the house together and hadn't hammered the nails in hard enough. The house creaked and groaned when we walked around, as if it was trying to tell us to tread gently. I sincerely hoped no big wind would blow and cause it to collapse while I was in it. There were no rugs on the floor, no electric lights, only kerosene lamps, no telephone, no radio, and no refrigerator, only a screened cooler. Another strange thing, there wasn't a single clock in the entire house. The first time I visited the Hadas, I asked Zenny how they ever knew what time it was, and he told me they could tell by the trains. The Western Pacific Railroad ran a few miles from their house, and there was a feeder line only 10 yards from their front gate, where freight trains ran to the lumber yard at East 14th. We know it's time to leave for school when the first train goes by in the morning, Zenny had said. But how do you know when to eat lunch and supper? Zenny shrugged. We eat when Ma tells us to. I guess that could be almost any time, since Auntie Hata seemed to do things whenever the mood struck her. Papa would go crazy here, I thought. He likes to have supper at 6:30 sharp, and that is exactly when Mama rings her black bell to call us all in to supper. Now Auntie Hata opened the door to my room and said, it's not fancy, but at least the roof doesn't leak. She certainly was right about its not being fancy. There was one window with no curtains, only a torn green shade rolled halfway down. And all there was in the small room was a narrow cot and an old bureau that looked as though it had been painted a dozen times. It was blue now, but I could see red where the blue had chipped off and some yellow beneath the red. Oh, we got that from the Salvation Army, Auntie Hata said about the bureau. She sat on the cot then and gave it a little bounce to make sure it wouldn't collapse, and told me that Mama had gotten the cot for her a long time ago from the dormitory at our church. A cot is a bed, by the way. Mrs. Hata doesn't come to our church, although I know Mama's tried to get her to. I think the only time she was for Mr. Hata's funeral. Mama and Papa made all the arrangements for her, and I happen to know they had to talk her out of keeping Mr. Hata's ashes in a small urn in her living room. Actually, she wanted to keep his ashes until she saved up enough money to take them back to his village cemetery in Japan. But that might have taken 20 years. Mama and Papa explained that it wasn't proper. Maybe it was even against the law to keep his ashes in her house. So she finally let them bury his remains in the Mountain View Cemetery. She kept a photo of Mr. Hata on the living room mantel instead. And the day I arrived, there was a tiny dish of rice and a marigold in a bud vase beside it. She didn't have a home shrine because she isn't Buddhist. But then she isn't a Christian either. I don't exactly know what she is, except that she's Japanese. Thank goodness Mr. Hada's ashes weren't on the mantel, I thought. If I were a spirit and got stuck in a small urn on the living room mantel, I would certainly want to come out and roam around a little at night. I was wondering if Auntie Hata had ever seen Mr. Hada's spirit floating around the house. I guess I was staring at her in an odd way because she suddenly said, "I'll make a bath for you tonight, Rinko," as though she were offering to make me a chocolate cake or something I would enjoy. "Where?" I asked. I still hadn't seen a bathtub in the house. "Oh, wherever you like. In the kitchen or outside." I told her I'd never taken a bath outside before. "Oh, it's lovely, Rinko. You soak in a tub with the hot water right up to your neck, and instead of a ceiling, there's a whole sky filled with stars." It sounded wonderful. I told her I definitely wanted an outside bath. So after we'd finished supper and the dishes, Zenny helped her carry out a square tin tub from the basement. They set it up at the side of the house on a grate over a shallow hole lined with bricks, and Auntie Hata built a small fire under the tub while Zenny filled it with the hose. I was afraid I'd get boiled alive like a lobster inside that thing, but Auntie Hata banked the fire and put a wooden float into the tub so I wouldn't get scorched. Then she set out a wooden platform beside it, and Zenny strung up some rope and hung some old sheets around 3 sides of the tub. The 4th side was open so I could look out at the fields. "There," Auntie Hata said when everything was ready. "You take first bath since you are our guest." And she showed me how to wash and rinse myself on the little platform before I got into the tub to soak. That way the water would stay clean for the others. "Just like in Japan," she said proudly. I washed myself as fast as I could and climbed into the deep tub. The wood float sank beneath me, and the water gurgled while I let myself down lower and lower until the water came right up to my chin. I looked up, and it was just like Auntie Hata said. There must have been 1,000,000 stars spread out across the sky, as though somebody had scattered a handful of diamonds in a huge black bowl. I wished they really were diamonds, and I could have just one tiny one to give to Mama. All she has is a thin gold wedding band. I never thought about her wanting jewelry or even wanting to dress up in a lot of fine clothes. I only thought about Mama the way I see her every day, wearing an apron and doing the wash and cooking. Her hair is never done with waves, and she never puts makeup on her face. But one day she told me she wished she could have a small diamond ring. I was surprised. "Well, it's just that I'd like something to leave for you, Rinko," she said. "Something that will last. Something to remember me by." It gave me the shivers to hear her say that. "Oh, you're never going to die, Mama," I told her. But deep inside, in a place I didn't want to look at or listen to, I knew someday she would, just like Mr. Hata. Naturally, Mama, who can see inside my skull, knew immediately what I was thinking. She suddenly brushed herself all over, as though she were brushing away dust and lint. "There," she said, "I've brushed away all the bad thoughts." And she never talked again about wanting a diamond ring, at least not to me. It was really peaceful sitting there in the tub. I could smell the eucalyptus branches smoldering beneath me, and I heard the crickets out in the fields. All the time I was soaking, I kept an eye on the fields, watching for flickering lights. But I didn't see a thing. Suddenly, I heard footsteps crunching down the path from the road. What if it was a burglar, I thought, or a hobo who'd seen our lights? I scrunched down in the tub since there was no place else to go. And when the footsteps got closer, I took a deep breath, held my nose, and ducked under the water. I stayed there until I thought my lungs would burst, and when I came up, I heard the barn door slam. I jumped out of the tub, put on my pajamas without even drying myself, and burst into the kitchen. Auntie Hada! Auntie Hada! There's somebody in the barn! Auntie Hada was sitting in one of the kitchen chairs, and Abu was standing behind her, pounding the knots out of her shoulder muscles with his fists. Harder, Abu, Auntie Hada was telling him. Pound harder. Zenny was hunched over the kitchen table, gluing a diamond kite together. Not one of them seemed the least bit interested in what I was saying. There's somebody in the barn, I yelled again. Maybe it's a burglar. Auntie Hada finally stood up, leaving Abu with his fists still clenched. Oh, why, that must be Mr. Yamanaka, she said, as calm as a Buddha. Who? The old man, Zenny explained without even looking up. What old man? The one who lives in the barn, Abu said, as though he were explaining something to a 3-year-old. Well, nobody told me, I said, beginning to feel stupid standing there with my damp pajamas stuck to me and water still dripping from my hair. Auntie Hada grabbed a dish towel and patted the water off my face and head. Mama would have had a fit if she'd seen her do that. Mama is so fussy. She even separates clean wash from dirty wash when she does the laundry. Dish towels are clean wash because they're used for drying the dishes, and they're washed first while the water is clean. You wouldn't want to eat off a dish wiped with a cloth that was washed with dirty socks, would you? Mama asks. And I guess I wouldn't. Well, Auntie Hada just kept drying me off with her dish towel and telling me about the old man. He's lived in our barn for about a year, but he keeps pretty much to himself. He's a cook at the Eagle Cafe on 7th Street and walks to and from work every day. For a minute, I forgot about my soggy self. All the way from 7th Street? That must be almost 100 blocks. If he was smart, he'd hitch a ride on the train, Zenny remarked. He'd just finished tying some strips of cloth to his kite's tail and was holding it up to see how it looked. And that's another thing, Auntie Hada said, as though she was continuing a conversation I'd interrupted with all my screaming and hollering. I don't want you boys riding those freight cars anymore. A little boy got killed last week doing that. And I don't want you to do it ever again. Do you hear me, Zenny? I hear. You keep Abu away from those freights too, understand? Okay, Ma, Zenny said without looking up. But I saw he had his fingers crossed. Now you get into some dry pajamas and go to bed, she said to me, as if I were one of her children, and she handed me a lamp to light the way to my room. I was embarrassed for having made a fool of myself and felt like a 6-year-old being sent off to bed. As soon as I put on some dry pajamas, I got my diary from the drawer where I'd hidden it, and I sprawled on my cot to write in it. Ordinarily, I start from the beginning of the day and write down everything that's happened to me. But starting out from home with Papa in my suitcase seemed like something that happened 3 days ago. If I started from morning, I would have filled the space for all 5 years. So I just began with the outdoor bath. I wrote this down. Suddenly heard a burglar coming, nearly drowned and died of fright. Turned out to be an old man who lives in the barn. Am very curious to see the strange old man. Also, to see Zenny's spirits. This is a pretty weird place. Can I stand it for 2 weeks? 1 month? The old cot squeaked and squealed whenever I moved, and I missed my own bed at home. I needed something comforting, remembered Mrs. Sugar's cookies, and ate 6, even though I'd already brushed my teeth. And that's the end of chapter 4. Join me next time to find out what's going to happen next for Rinko while she's at Mrs. Haru's house. See you then.